All right, welcome. This is Answer Everywhere. We're looking at Vue.js, the source code. This is an improvised live show where every episode we take a look at a repo that I'm unfamiliar with, and just explore, see what we can learn given a bounded amount of time and often a limited amount of background context. So, in the vein of limited background context, I am not a JavaScript developer. I haven't ever used Vue. I have no real idea how it's different from the various other JavaScript frameworks. Although in the past, and I'll put those videos below, we have looked at React, and we just looked at Angular about a few minutes ago. Um, and we've looked at uh, Flutter, which is not a JavaScript framework, but is a Dart framework, which is kind of in the same vein. So a bunch of the patterns we've seen before, I'm going to sort of move quickly over and just assume that a lot of people are coming to this with the having seen some of the earlier videos, so that we have some context and don't always get bogged down in the same concepts, especially given that we have a bounded amount of time. Um, 1 second, let me pop this up over here. All right. Okay, so I mostly TypeScript, like Angular. I guess TypeScript is essentially taken over, perhaps, in the JavaScript world. Uh, it says their marketing is where to go up here, I guess. Vue.js is a progressive, incrementally adoptable JavaScript framework for building UI on the web. This tells us a few things. One is that they're targeting web. You could, in theory, like Flutter targets multiple different things. Um, Angular seems to have uh, different platforms. I don't know if Angular has is more than just a web framework. Progressive, I'm not entirely sure. I know what that means from a technical point of view. I'm familiar with it as a marketing term. Incrementally adoptable, I assume, means that it's not. Uh, I think with something like Angular, that you like adopt the whole thing at once, and it it gives the structure to your application. And I think that the idea that Vue um, is trying to communicate is that you don't have to do everything all at once. And I just see that Dan and Jay just gave me, I don't know, this is 100 of something. That's awesome. Thank you. Um, Very cool. Can I do this? Can I heart this? I don't know. All right, cool. All right, so let's look in this. Let's see what's going on. Um, since I don't know um, much about Vue, I'm going to kind of prime the pump here a little bit and ask Bard to tell me. Um, Assume I'm somewhat familiar with React and Angular. How is Vue.js different than these frameworks? What might be some surprises, I'll say. All right, so it's going to think about that. And in the meantime, I'll start opening up stuff. So I don't see a lot here. This, I believe, is the main repository. Please follow the documentation. We don't do that around here. Okay, so scripts packages are really the only game in town. Change logs is not going to be so interesting. We have some lint stuff, git ignore, node version, prettier, which I guess is the, we're going to take a look at prettier later this week, which is, I think, like a code formatter. Um, and so really that's it. So is everything in packages? In packages, we have some useful stuff. Scripts has like build.js. Maybe that's like the build script. So Angular was using Bazel, which is like an industrial build/make system that supports multiple languages. I don't know if this is just has some build script that maybe is based on Node or something. All framework works on the principle of reactivity, but what makes it different is how the reactivity is defined. I think this is true of recent frameworks. Yeah. So I that's that I am going to assume is also true of Vue. Um, and maybe to some extent how it's defined is largely a matter of API, but I think that like Angular, at least according to Bard, I don't know if this is still the case, still had like a two-directional flow. I feel like I've read that they support some sort of one-directional thing, and then React has this one-directional flow. So it seems like there, in addition to like the reactive style, there may be some more fundamental, like architectural choices that will impact things like performance, developer speed, developer happiness, those sorts of things. So build.js has this run function. It's going to make a directory, do some remove cache. This looks like it really is building stuff. Await build all. So, but is it delegating to some existing thing like npm? I don't know. We've got promises. npm. Is that a version of npm? Bask, disk space efficient package manager. So it's at least calling pnpm. And for example, if you build all, it's going to run parallel on all of your CPUs unconfigurably, the targets. And I guess build is the thing that it's calling. And build does what? Build is an async function that resolves it looks in the packages directory, gets the target. I guess you have to have this particular structure in order to use the build system. It's going to look in your package.json. Going to check whether it's a release. If building a specific format, do not remove. So this is some sort of like option, I guess. And then we're going to call exec a, maybe exec async, roll up, whatever environment is. What is roll up? Packaging and yeah. The roll up is a module bundler for JavaScript. Okay. So that's just what I wanted to check. I wanted to see if it had its own build system, but it's really just shelling out to existing JavaScript stuff. Why was that the first thing I looked at? I don't know. All right, and then a lot of this is I think yeah, I know. I wanted to just verify that this directory was something we can safely ignore for the rest of the stream. Okay, and that basically just leaves packages. And I guess I don't need this core directory open. So we have reactivity. We have the runtime DOM, the runtime core. Let's definitely look at runtime core. Vue compat. We are Vue. So I don't know what we're compat with. Maybe the previous versions or something. There's a Vue root directory. Vue, which dist file to use? So I guess I don't know if this is like you have a CDN or you're pulling it from Vue CDN. I don't know. So this is some build stuff. This seems to be an important thing. We have JSX, which I feel like came from React initially, which I think is the JavaScript-based XML thing. JSX, JavaScript. Is JSX unmodified? So there's a French wrapper. JavaScript XML, an XML-like syntax for JavaScript. Created by Facebook for use with React. Okay, so they're using, I guess, at least, or they have support for the React JSX thing. Server renderer, I guess that's for rendering on the server as opposed to the client. You have some examples in a compiler. And then Vue, the source has just dev, index, and runtime. Runtime might be good. Seems to be just kind of like not where the like main algorithms and data structures are. Okay, so I'm gonna guess Vue is not the coolest. I think packages is the coolest. So we have runtime core, SFC playground. SFC might be, I'm not sure. Reactivity, we'll look at runtime core. Did we already do this? Runtime core is already open. Runtime DOM. Maybe server renderer and compiler. And I don't know what SFC is, but we keep seeing it. And I don't know if we opened reactivity, but let's open that. And then template explorer, I guess is for exploring templates. All right, let's see what Bart has to say. Framework versus library. So React is a UI library. Wait, I don't, yeah. Angular is a full-fledged framework. So I guess the main difference is a library you can adopt more flexibly than a framework. Vue.js sits in the middle, offering core UI functionality like React, with optional extras for things like routing and state management. Doesn't React offer things like routing and state management? Maybe they're in separate packages, but there is like React Router, and React does have state stuff, but maybe this means state management in like some larger sense. Learning curve. Vue.js boasts a gentler learning curve compared to Angular, which has a steeper climb due to its complexity. Yeah, although I think learning curves, everyone says steep learning curve, but I feel like a learning curve, steep means you learn a lot quickly. Here's an example of, I don't know what these units are. All right, never mind. Not worth, not worth digging into. Okay, so so Angular takes more time to learn well compared to Vue, which makes sense because Vue is smaller and lighter or whatever. So Vue flexibility. It takes a progressive approach. You can include it incrementally in existing projects or use the full-fledged framework. Okay, and whereas React and Angular push for all-in adoption, templating, they have their own templating syntax similar to Angular. I don't think we ever looked at an Angular templated thing. I guess let's do that quickly. So Angular and Vue.js template. Rollup is builder, which does like combines multiple JavaScript into a single, like a bundle, I guess, and divides them based on chunks. As per. All right, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Danjay. This is very helpful. This is not a template. These are like, whatever. I just kind of wanted to see the syntax. Standing templates. Get an example. Angular template example. And then Vue.js template example. Let's spell example correctly. So I guess this is a template. No, that's a TypeScript thing. So here's a template, I guess. I think this is just the templating syntax. And that's a standard sort of syntax, same stuff used for Go. I assume that's where the name mustache comes from. Yeah, okay. So we've got some templating syntax and presumably differ a little bit on the edges, like how, a for loop would look or whatever. But it's generally considered easier to learn and use. Community and ecosystem, not as fast, whatever. Okay. Simplicity, composability. Okay, so how realistic is it to gradually adopt Vue.js in a large existing Angular code base. It's technically possible. Okay. Microservices. All right. So it sounds like Vue.js says you can adopt it incrementally, but I'm not sure compared to what. Maybe compared to not having already adopted React or Angular. I'm not sure. Okay, here's the runtime core. For full exposed APIs, you can look at the index.ts. It's published only for typing and building custom renderers. It's not meant to be used by applications. Okay, therefore, let's look at it. I guess index.ts is just going to export some stuff. Not so cool. Source. API. So I guess we have this API prefix that keeps all these files together when you list the directory in alphabetical order. So, and we have things like async component, computed, create app, define component. So this is the runtime. I guess let's look at create app. We looked at the create app version in Angular. Computed, I don't know what that is. Async component is presumably maybe they are part of the component, like maybe components are the unit of Lego building blocks, and async components are the ones that support async. Here's component. Component props is presumably properties. Render utils, slots. Slots might be like signals. Signals and slots is a common naming convention. A directive. Sounds very executive. Hydration is, I'm going to guess, similar to Angular hydration. Already, I assume partially because this is smaller, but the layout is clearer. You can it's easier to find the cooler files when I guess when things are smaller and they're all in the same place. Scheduler, I think is worth looking at. vnode, I'm going to just speculate, is just like a tree node for the shadow DOM. And this is H and HMR. I will open them just to avoid missing something fundamental. Hello, Henri. Welcome. I'm glad you're able to join. All right, so I opened all those things, and I feel like that's going to be the core of it. Let me make sure that see if I can close any of this stuff. So reactivity is probably going to be a rabbit hole. Runtime DOM, that might be a rabbit hole. Server renderer, I think I'm going to ignore server renderer for now. Compiler core, let's take a quick look to see if I can ignore it. Well, it's going to look like a compiler. We've got tokenizers, parsers, options, index. I'm wondering if this is based on the TypeScript compiler again. I'm going to start a new chat so that it doesn't remember my context and think I want comparisons with Angular. But let's try ChatGPT just for fun. So tell me about the compiler, the Vue.js compiler. For example, is it based on the TypeScript compiler? And LLMs take a while to generate their output, so I'll wait. I'll check in on it in a little bit. So here's compiler DOM and compiler core. I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop compiler stuff out into their own window, and that way, if I decide later that compilers are no longer cool, then we can just skip this. Still don't know what SFC is. Here's reactivity, and here's the API core stuff. I guess I'll give reactivity its own window. And let's look at Vue SFC. Single file component. A single file component, aka startup Vue files, is a special file format that allows us to encapsulate the template, logic, and styling of a Vue component. So this is, I guess, the template logic. This is maybe equivalent to what you would use XML for in Android development. So let's see what ChatGPT has to say. It uses template-based syntax to build reactive user interfaces. Okay, so the compiler is, among other things, going to basically instantiate the templates. It's gonna read in templates, figure out what all the templatey things refer to, and generate some code, maybe either in JavaScript or whatever. The I guess it has to be JavaScript, right? Because that's what the browser understands. There's not like a. I'm not sure. I'll ask about that. It translates the Vue templates into JavaScript code. There we go. That can be executed in the browser. Unlike some other frameworks, Vue.js does not have a separate compilation step, and the compilation happens in the browser at runtime. Okay, so kind of like just-in-time compilation, but maybe it's more like translation. It's not based on the TypeScript compiler. It's itself written in TypeScript, but the compiler is specifically designed for Vue templates. Okay, so that's maybe not as fascinating as it could be, but I will ask, uh, can does the compiler produce human readable JavaScript? By which I'll include like minified JavaScript, or does it target a JavaScript virtual machine of some type? It says JavaScript code. It's typically human readable and is meant to be executed by the JavaScript engine in the browser. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. So I think I'm going to ignore compiler, depending on how quickly we get to various other interesting things. So here's API create app. Presumably this is where we're going to create the app. So we have an app, which is parameterized by a host element, which is any type. So it can be anything. And it has things like a version and a config. It use is going to take some options, or rather, it's a function parameterized by options extending unknown, I guess is how you read this. But it's going to take some plugins, which I guess the reason that this type is essentially unconstrained is because plugins can be relatively unconstrained. And we just basically have a list of plugins. We have some mixins. You can, I guess, pass in these component options. And components seem to be really central. Whatever directives, we're going to look at directives soon. And then mount, I guess it's using a metaphor with the file system, I suppose. The root container is essentially a host element. Whether to hydrate it in a namespace, and it's going to return a component public instance. So I guess this is saying mount will take this element thing, this container, presumably like a part of the tree that needs to be rendered, and possibly hydrate it and give it a namespace. And it's going to return, I suppose, a public instance of the thing that you wanted to mount. Unmount is void. It's presumably going to unmount the thing. Provide, has the injection key pattern from that we saw in Angular. This is going to be some sort of dependency injection thing that you can inject any kind of type and give a provider for it. Run with context. So this should essentially be a way of running background stuff, threads or lightweight threads. Runs a function with the app as active instance. This allows using of inject within the function to get access to variables provided by app.provide. So, okay. I don't know what that means. This allows the using inject within a function, within the function. Runs a function with the app as active instance. Okay, so um, you're going to run a function using this thing, and it's going to be, I guess, run with the context of the app. And because it's run in the context of the app, you're kind of passing it into this um, create app.ts files point of view, and the create app.ts file knows about the providers and is able to, actually call them without getting, a null result or an error. And so I guess this is just a way of running a function in the context of being able to invoke the providers, is what that's saying. Some internal stuff, but they need to expose them for server renderer and dev tools. Version 3, version 2 compatibility, etc. Here's an app config, which is an interface. Performance. Here's a Boolean. Yes performance or no performance. I don't know if I don't know what that means. I can't imagine a context in which I can imagine performance trade-offs, but I can't imagine just like a performance switch that you would never want to possibly extend into an enum, right? Like if you're going to allow it to be tunable, it seems like you would maybe have an enum that has like yes or no values essentially, but it allows you to in the future make other trade-offs. Okay, so option merge strategies, which is a record. I don't know if record is a JavaScript thing. Possibly it is. Of strings and option merge functions. Let's look up records and tuples. They're an upcoming feature. Yeah. If you've used other languages, except. Okay, except what? A brand new primitive. Okay, so it's some kind of record. I don't know how that's really going to be different from a like a dictionary, but it is different. Different enough that they've added it to JavaScript. So it's some kind of record. We've got some global properties, some error handlers, warning handler, I guess, so that you can separate things like logging errors versus warnings or whatever, and some compiler options. And we've learned, or at least ChatGPT claims, that the compiler is really just understanding templates. So I don't think it's as complex as the um, as the uh, as the Angular compiler. And Henri is saying possibly immutable. Yeah, yeah, maybe JavaScript record, maybe MDN. MDN might tell me words. No, JavaScript records immutable. Did I? A, right? A record is similar to a JavaScript object, but enforces a specific set of allowed string keys and has default values. Okay. I don't know if it is immutable, but maybe. As immutable is immutable. Is this something you can call on a record? I guess you can at least set them to be immutable. A record is an object in JavaScript with the exception that the record is not an object, but a deeply immutable primitive value. Okay, cool. I don't know. I don't know enough about JavaScript to know why they're needed, but I've encountered records in other languages. Um, some of this seems a little bit familiar from Kotlin. I don't know if Kotlin borrowed these the same set of concepts from somebody else, or if this is like jointly influenced by some third party or whatever. But that's cool. Sounds like sounds like records are maybe more stable in a sense, more grown up than JavaScript objects, which seem to be a little bit freewheeling. Okay, so we have an app context, which has things like mixins and components and directives and provides. It's basically like just a list of this stuff. And we have some cache. We're going to cache the options, cache for merge / normalized component options, and cache the properties, which is a weak map I guess, from concrete components to normalized props options. The caching stuff like this is, I think I mentioned this in Angular, is one of those things that I feel like is really easy to get wrong. Anytime you have um, multiple, uh, essentially multiple sources of truth of the state, essentially often the cache becomes the source of truth, at least for a short time. Um, and that's the sort of thing where that the cache can become invalidated essentially. Plugin install function, I guess, is a type, a way to install a function, etc. And then we have this function create app context, which is really just going to populate some, I guess, some config essentially. It's going to set these caches to new weak maps. It's going to set performance to false, is native tag to no, etc., and set things to undefined. And then if you pass, got this create app function host element thing, which will set the root component to, I guess you can set the root component and you can set the root props if you want to some data. I don't know if this is like live data, but I guess we'll see. And then we have the create app API, which will, this is I think this is the stuff that they said you were not supposed to monkey with. This is for mainly for internal use. But I guess you can maybe change the root render function. And you can change the root hydrate function. And it's going to return the create app. And what is this? So render is the name of this function. Let's see where they use render. Let is mounted equals false. So we get some context and an empty set of installed plugins. We say we're not mounted to start with. And then we're going to set this context app thing to, we're going to set the root props, which is something that I don't think was passed in. We're going to create this getter and setter and stuff. What I want to know is, where is render used? What if you just highlight all? Is this the right function? Yeah. Okay, so this create app API or maybe create API app. In context reload, HMR root reload. HMR, what is HMR? Hot reload. Well, yeah, hot module replacement. Okay, so when we're doing hot reload, which is somehow related to hot module replacement or is maybe called hot module replacement in Vue, the context reload function, its implementation is going to call the render function that we passed in. And it's going to clone the V node. V stands for who knows what, but some tree, and it's going to get the root container. And this render function is going to do the rendering. And if we are hydrating, then we call the hydrate function that we passed in. And if we're not hydrating, then we're going to render. And then we say that we've mounted. And we set the app container to the root container. And if we are in dev mode, or we've enabled dev tools in production mode, I guess, then we're going to set the app instance to the vnode component and initialize the app. So presumably this gives you some access to the nodes, to the app instance for tooling around and debugging. And then unmount, we check if we're mounted. And if we're not, we just issue a warning if we're in dev. And if we are mounted, then we're going to render null on the app container. And if we are in dev, whoa. And then we're going to delete the app container, essentially. Okay. And then we have this provide thing, which is called context provides. Okay, so context is doing some work here. So where does context come from? Context is the app context. Do we have app context open? I'm not sure. I thought I pulled reactivity aside. Get out of here, reactivity. Uh, let's look for, well, now. Let's look for render. Render to simple stream. And what else do we have? We have this preprocessor render thing. Render to string. You can render like the whole app to a string, I guess. Is that right? Is this just like creating HTML from the templates or something? And we have server render render.ts, which is just, I think, this, maybe just exporting stuff. Okay. So we'll come back to here, I guess. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing an important like rendering algorithm. Like that seems to be what either React or some React adjacent thing was. Sorry, I missed some stuff. Weird. JavaScript is a weird space, but I have to pick up front end team in the future. Yeah. So far, honestly, um, Vue looks like really the people who wrote it. I can tell um, are influenced by lots of other smart projects. Everything is clean, um, and while it may not, I'm going to guess that there's probably advantages to using something like Angular if you are a giant organization like a like a bank and it's customer facing and you really need performance or whatever. But Vue seems like probably maybe the space I would start, I guess, so far, based on based on pretty limited context. It seems small enough, understandable, and also doing things correctly. I don't really remember what my impression of React was, but I guess at the time, well, first of all, React is huge. I think when it was created, it was probably much smaller, but now it's like it's run by a corporation, and over time, those big things get even bigger. But it also felt like React was trying to. I felt like the source code was they were trying to do more of like inventing their own stuff or like having clever solutions to problems rather than um, having boring best practice solutions to problems, which is typically what I prefer for for something for like a framework or a library. I don't want to spend time fighting. And hello, Sang, welcome. All right. So that's, I think I'll leave create app there and move along and see what else we see. API computed. I don't know what this means. Computed. Return underscore computed. Import computed as computed from reactivity. I guess it's something from reactivity. I'm curious enough now, though. I guess we're computing a value from something. Oh, it's computed. Type of underscore computed. That's the runtime thing. Here's reactivity computed.ts. A computed getter. I guess it's like a getter that instead of just having its value, it computes a value based on some stuff, which is not so fascinating. Hello, Fab Mystery. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see everyone here. All right, let's return to the API, the runtime core. Here's define component. I'm guessing this is going to be, what? I would like to see if there are a bunch of just components. We see like the zoo of components. We have global, the component function that returns a component. We have component.ts. This looks promising. So we've seen data before. It looks like data is just a record. I assume record, this essentially means it maps a string to something like a keyed, essentially like a dictionary. I'm guessing that's what a record is about. But, or rather, the thing I wanted to highlight here is that data is just a record. It's nothing more fancy, nothing less fancy. And then we have component instance, but what I wanted was component, which is what, parameterized somehow? Okay. A type used in public APIs where a component type is expected. The constructor type is an artificial type returned by a defined component. So a component has props, I'm guessing properties, raw bindings. I don't know what we're binding to what, but um, maybe bindings, maybe these come from like variables in a template that get bound to some value or something else. Whatever D is, maybe data. Computed options, method options, lots of different kinds of options. And it's either one of the, it's either, what? Okay, so it's parameterized by these things, I guess, is maybe how you read this. And the constructor or the type is this. So I guess it's whatever the syntax is saying, it seems to be either a concrete component or a component public instance constructor. If you have a component, I guess it's saying it's one of these two things. We see lifecycle hook here. We haven't looked at the lifecycle yet, but I've opened the lifecycle file, so we'll be able to look at that. We have the internal render function, which has a context, a cache, some props, etc. This doesn't actually, this is like the type of the function. It's not actually, I guess, the function itself. So do we see concrete, what was it? Concrete component. Okay, so we can cast a vnode type as a concrete component. That's useful to know. Seems like maybe a component is just kind of a view on vnodes or something like this, something like that. Let's see if we can find what the vnodes are. What I'm expecting is that somewhere there's a like a list of things that you can use, like the Legos. You know, the Legos. We have arrays and children and normalized children. Vnode is an interface. We have a host node, which is a renderer node. I guess that is the node that does the rendering, as opposed to a rendered node that gets rendered. A host element, which is the renderer element, and some extra props. And they have a type, which are the vnode types, and props, and a key. I think this is a key, I guess, so you can look up the node, and a ref. I don't know really how a key is so different from a ref, but presumably they are. A scope ID for single something or other components only, single file maybe. This is assigned on vnode creation during current scope ID, which is set alongside current rendering instance. Okay, so we've got some scope stuff. I'm not really sure how that works. You can have children, which makes sense since we're a node in some sort of tree or graph structure. A component internal instance. Maybe this is a reference to the kind of component that's modeled by the node. And whatever directives are, I guess those are things that can be bound because we have directive binding and transition hooks. For what? Maybe for transitioning to the next node. And then we have DOM stuff. We're still in vnode, right? So wait, where did our DOM stuff go? Did I scroll past it? Yeah. Okay, so I guess the vnode, yeah, this makes sense. It corresponds to some element. It might be part of an anchor. Teleporting, I guess, is similar to linking, but not exactly. And then we've got a counter for what? Maybe for like reference counting. Number of elements contained in a static vnode. So I guess it counts the number of elements. Whatever suspense is, SS content, maybe SS as in like CSS styling. Shape flag and patch flag are for optimization. Some dynamic properties, etc. Okay, so that's a large thing. Oh, Big Brother. Hello, Big Brother. Hopefully not like the Not like the 1984 Big Brother. Okay, so and then we have block state, current state, open block, close block. Okay, so this is tree stuff. I want to just see what the types of nodes are. Vue node type, maybe? This is looking promising. A Vue node type is either a string, a Vue node, or a component, or text, static, comment, fragment, teleport, teleport implementation, or suspense. Okay. I don't know what suspense is, though. Maybe it's for Vue suspense. The built-in component for orchestrating async dependencies in a component tree. Okay, so is it for suspending execution? It can render a loading state while waiting for multiple nested async dependencies down the component tree to be resolved. I guess it keeps you in suspense. It's like a spinner, I guess, essentially. So imagine a component hierarchy like the following. So we've got a dashboard with a profile and some content. And I guess the suspense says that we're going to wait until all the stuff is done. Is that right? Without suspense, each of them will need to handle its own loading, error, and loaded states. Okay. So that's what suspense is. Makes sense. I'm not sure I would have predicted that it gets the same um, like level of abstraction as a string or a component or a node. But I guess you do need to have some custom logic to make sure that all of the waiting time happens and like somehow bubbles up to the suspense thing. API define component. Now that we've seen some components, I don't know if this defined component is going to be so fascinating. This is almost reading like generated code. Single character variable names. What? That's not cool. No, it's fine. I think that this is basically barely meant to be human readable. All right, so we're going to ignore that. Here's lifecycle. I'm curious what the lifecycle is, but we're not going to look too much at like the implement. We're not going to learn about best practices for implementing lifecycle. I would just like to know a little bit about how they've modeled it. I guess it looks like we have hooks, lifecycle hooks: before mount, mounted; before update, updated; before unmount, unmounted; and server prefetch. So I guess the main thing is mounting, right? For these Vue folks, and then once you've mounted and or unmounted, the stuff gets updated. When does it get updated? I'm not sure. Um, I guess they have some sort of shadow DOM and they decide when things are dirty and change things appropriately. Here's component.ts. Did I already look at this? I see slots, internal slots, all kinds of slots. Component instance. Extracting the instance type of a component works with all valid component definition types. It's intended to replace the usage of instance of, which only works for constructor-based component definition types. So this is basically introspection to find out what type something is. More stuff about props. A functional component, I'm going to guess, is a component that has some functionality. We have this emits option stuff. S extends record. I'm not sure really how to read this. We have a class component, which is maybe like stateful. A concrete component. A concrete component type matches its actual value. It's either an options object or a function. Okay, it's either an options object, so basically a bunch of options, or a function. Use this where the code expects to work with actual values. For example, checking if it's a function or not. This is mostly for an internal implementation code. All right. Let's look at Vue function component. Just so I have an idea of. Vue recommends using templates to build applications in the vast majority of cases. So you're supposed to use templates. It provides an H function for creating vnodes. Okay, so we're importing H. We saw this h.ts file. I think it's open somewhere. So we're going to create a const vnode. I didn't know that vnode was like user visible. We're going to call h of div with this like HTML property stuff. And so div is a string, but it's going to be somehow reified into a type. And then it has children. H is short for hyperscript, which means JavaScript that produces HTML. Okay, so I guess this is as opposed to JSX. All right, so when using the templates composition API, the return value of setup hook is used to expose data to the template. And using render functions, however, we can directly return the render function instead. So we're importing some stuff. We're exporting some stuff, props or whatever. Setup of props is we're going to have this counter, which I guess is being set to 1 possibly. And the render function. Oh, okay. So I guess the style here in Vue is that you return a function that says how you want it to be rendered or something like that. So in this case, we're going to have a div that is going to take the message and the count value as properties. Or something like that. Okay, yeah. So I think this is pretty different from something like Vue or Flutter. I think if I understand it correctly, but maybe not. Okay, so I guess you implement some rendery function, and then you can also do JSX instead of calling H with the string div. You can use this XML like syntax. Fine. All right, so wait, that didn't answer my question of what a component, a function component looks like. Components basics. Components allow us to split the UI into independent and reusable pieces. Yeah, it's a tree of nested components. So you can define a component, I guess, in a .vue file. Import ref, whatever ref is. I don't know, reference count, or is this just a common example? I guess this is a counter that starts at 0. Yeah, okay. So that's a component. It's basically a snippet of template stuff. We're not using a build step. It can be defined using plain JavaScript. All right, fine. What is a functional component? We have an emit function. You can optionally declare emitted events. Okay, so I guess you can emit event. I don't think that's what I'm looking for, but dynamic components for things like switching in a tabbed interface. There's a special component element with its special is attribute. Okay, so there's some syntax for it. Okay, so all this stuff I think gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, but that was semi-useful to understand how they think about components. Component props, this is presumably going to be just property implementation based on what we just saw. The props are just essentially HTML props that get stuffed into whatever their representation of a component is. Component slots, I'm going to guess, is signaling. Unwrap slots, raw slots, manually render fn hint to skip forced children. Okay, normalize. Okay, so we can see from this error that the slots seem to have keys. Slot key invoked outside the render function. Normalize object slots. Init slots. It's going to take an instance, an internal instance, and some normalized children. How are they normalized? I'm not sure, but there's some sort of normalization operation. And if it's a shape flag and it has s slots children, then we cast the children as raw slots. And if the cast was successful, users can get the shallow read-only version of the slots object through this slot. So maybe it's not signals. Maybe these are slots in the sense of like list items almost. I'm not sure. Update slots. That's all we have. Do we import any slot stuff that I'm missing a more fundamental font? We have slot flags. The internal slots is a name. Either a slot. Okay, here's the slot type. It's going to be a thing that a t that extends any, and it's a v node. It's a list of v node. A single slot is a list of v nodes. So I guess like it's thinking of a slot as a list of empty something or others. Let's see what the documentation has to say. Slots. It assumes I have read the component basics. You shouldn't assume such things. All right. We have learned that components can accept props, which can be JavaScript values of any type. But how about template content? In some cases, we may want to pass a template fragment to a child component and let the child component render the fragment within its own template. Okay, so I guess instead of pre-rendering everything, we might want to give the template fragment unrendered to a child, to something that that we depend on, I guess, right? As opposed to depends on us, and let the child. I assume like if you have outside and then inside, the inside thing is the child, so we depend on them doing whatever they need to do before we can render or whatever. And let the child component render the fragment within its own template. Okay. That sounds a little messy though, doesn't it? All right. The slot element is a slot outlet that indicates where the parent provided slot content should be rendered. Okay. It's a slot outlet. So here's the slot context. It's got a fancy button that says click me. And then that's the parent. This is the parent template. And we're going to replace this red button with whatever the slot thing is that I guess the child is going to fill it in. What? Don't do that. Content distribution with slots. Maybe this is what I was supposed to have read. Just like with HTML elements, it's often useful to be able to pass content to a component. Like this, alert box, something bad happened. It says render some alert. This can be achieved using Vue's custom slot element. So we've got some template. This is an error message. For demo purposes is the like title text. And it's got a slot. And we've got this style. We use the slot as a placeholder where we want the content to go. And that's it. We're done. Why isn't it just like a templated thing with like curly braces? That's all you need to know about slots for now. All right. So whatever a slot is, it's basically a placeholder in the like the DOM essentially. I'm so fast but nice and best. Thank you. I'm glad I am nice and best of all. Yeah. Fast. I do. I feel a little bit bad about the Angular one because I had a limited amount of time because it was there was one starting after, so I feel a little bit like I sped through that more than I wanted to. So sorry about that if you feel that way. Okay, so directives. This is seems like a fundamental type that we've seen before, but we haven't seen yet like what it is. We've just seen it being referenced a bunch of times. We have directive. We have this binding stuff. We'll take a v, a value, I guess. Component instance is null, old value. But what is it? Okay, runtime helper for applying. But what is a directive? Example usage resolve component. You get the comp, you resolve directive foo and bar. then return with directives h of comp, foo is this dot x, and bar is this dot y. Okay, I have no idea what any of this is. Are we importing something more fundamental? I'm not sure. Directive hooks. So we have hooks, whatever they are. Whatever directives are, they have hooks. So with directives, you can pass it in something that extends a V node, and it will add the directives to the V node. I think they just have like a place to store the V nodes. Invoke directive hook. Maybe directives are just a way of binding hooks to things. Is that what? Let's start by searching the code, see if there's a more fundamental directive place. So this is the global thing. This is create app, which we looked at before. I think this is the problem we're looking at now, right? Runtime core source directives.ts. Did we look at 62? Maybe I just glossed over 62. Okay, a directive is either an object directive or a function directive. A function directive takes a t and a v, whatever t is, but v is presumably value, and it is just a directive hook. An object directive takes a t, maybe type and value, and just keeps track of whether it was created before, mounted, etc., and whether it's deep. I don't think that really tells me what a directive is, though. So let's go again to the Vue documentation. Built-in directives, custom. Let's look at built-in ones. Update so v-text, update the elements text content. It expects a string. Okay, so we have this, I guess this is the template, right? So we have some span, and its v-text is message is the same as putting this message in a template. Is this just saying that a directive is the same thing as a like a template, a way of instantiating things in a template? VHTML, update the elements inner HTML. So the div, you have the VHTML, and I guess that's a thing you can replace. I really don't know what these these are supposed to be doing. VIF, conditionally render. I guess a directive is, I think directive is supposed to be maybe synonymous with just the coding part of the templates, the part of the template that is implementing some sort of Turing machine. Attach an event listener. So I think that's what it's saying essentially. Is there like a concepts, global API, application general? Let's ask Bard. In Vue, what is a directive? There's special instructions embedded within HTML attributes that start with the prefix V. They extend the functionality of HTML elements. They can perform various tasks like conditionally rendering components, etc., built-in versus customized syntax. So are these just the computational elements in the rendered template? They are not sole building blocks. Okay, so templates consist of various elements like HTML tags, text, and directives. All work together to present the UI. Okay, so HTML tags, we know what they are. They're basically text, and then there's other text, and then directives. So it sounds like directives are the things that have behavior. What they are. Okay, so is there anything else in a Vue template that has behavior other than directives? Or are directives the only way to get behavior. Okay. So we have mustache interpolations. All right. I don't know if that's just an alternative syntax. Event listeners. Okay. And components. By nesting components, yeah, whatever. Computed properties. And you can also put JavaScript code blocks. Okay. So those are, yeah, okay. So I guess these JavaScript code blocks are essentially a literal code block, I assume. And event listeners, this is presumably kind of like a decorators. And then mustache interpolations is presumably mostly just string interpolation. Embed data properties or expressions directly. Okay. So create a painting of the ideal Vue.js developer. All right, we'll come back. There you go. I don't know why this guy's the Vue.js developer. He looks a little bit 19th century. So create a painting of the conflict between Angular, React, and Vue developers, each personified in a recognizable way. All right, and then we'll come back to see how it does. All right. So directives, I'm going to just imagine them as the things that give behavior, things like if statements and whatnot. It doesn't maybe. Well, certainly I didn't start with the Vue documentation, but I've been a little bit surprised that when I look up a core concept that one of the first results isn't a thing that like defines clearly what it is. It does give examples, which is great. A lot of documentation doesn't give examples, but it would be nice to have like a one sentence like technical definition of what it is, essentially communicating to other developers um, how they should think about it in the context of like everything else that they've learned before. Here's renderer.ts. A renderer node can technically be any object in the context of core renderer logic. They are never directly operated on and always passed to the node op functions provided via options. Okay. So we have renderer internals, the internals of a renderer. And we have things like p to patch. I guess p is the patch function, maybe, an unmount function, a remove function. So I guess to be a renderer, you have to implement all of these things. Type patch function. These functions are created inside a closure, and therefore their types cannot be directly exported. Okay, so a patch function has, I guess, two nodes, node 1 and node 2, a container, which is a renderer element, an anchor, possibly, a parent component namespace, etc. And I don't know what all of these do. I think I'm going to stop pretty soon. So I'm not going to dig too much in. I'm just kind of curious how this rendering logic compares. And maybe I'll just ask Bard, scheduler, I wanted to see. Maybe this is just scheduling like async functions. Computed Boolean. What are we scheduling? Indicates whether the effect is allowed to recursively trigger itself when managed by the scheduler. Okay, so recursion attached by renderer is used when setting a component's render effect. So there is a thing that might own it. Yes. So scheduler jobs, plural, is either a scheduler job or a list of scheduler jobs. Is flush pending. So I guess this is probably keeping track of maybe we built some stuff and we're like flushing the buffer to screen or to something log. And we have a queue, and the queue is just a list or array, I guess list technically. I think JavaScript has its own arrays of schedule. So a queue is just a list of scheduler jobs. Flush index, maybe to keep track of where we've flushed to. Pending flush CVs. I guess these are callbacks of a list of scheduler jobs to call maybe post flush. And then active post flush CVs. I guess these are the callbacks, I guess, that are actively running. And then post flush index, presumably into these post flushy things. Next tick, we're going to give a T and an R, maybe a type and a renderer or something like that. And we're going to return a promise. The implementation, right? So, no, this is the type information. So whatever P is we have a const P, which is either a current flush promise or a resolved promise. So it's a promise essentially, and it may or may not have been resolved. And the thing we're going to return is if we have a function that's been passed in, which is of a type R, then we're going to call on the promise. We're going to say the next thing that happens after the promise is something, depending on this. The first thing we passed in. If this, I guess, is non-null, I don't know what else this might be true. Then we're going to call function bind on this. Otherwise, we're going to return P. It seems like what this is doing is just chaining promises together, essentially, which is, I would think, performance-wise, much slower than what stuff like React was doing, but I'm not sure. Seems like you could build up possibly large chains of promises, and you have maybe limited control over things like parallelism, although maybe that's taken care of in the stuff that calls this function. Find insertion index will use binary search to find the suitable position in the queue so that the queue maintains the increasing order of jobs IDs. Okay, so this is finding a queue position using binary search. The queue job function. This is some sort of search that might deduplicate stuff, I guess. We can queue flush. And if we're not flushing, then we set flushing to true, and we set current flush promise to resolved promise.then flush jobs. Where did resolved promise come from? I guess it's it's outside the scope, right? Maybe it's a global, maybe it's a class level variable. At any rate, the flushing, I don't know what the flush jobs are, but basically, again, we're using the promises functionality essentially to do scheduling. You post flush CV, and I think this is more just flushy stuff. Is there anything? Here's flush jobs. We've got some map, essentially a set, I assume, whether it's been seen, although you can index it, I guess, since it's a count map. Sort queue before flushing. So we've got a queue, and we're going to sort it with some comparator. This ensures that components are updated from parent to child, because parent is always created before the child, so its render effect will have smaller priority numbers. If a component is unmounted during a parent component's update, its update can be skipped. Okay, so we're going to sort the queue of, I guess, jobs, flush jobs maybe. And then we're going to possibly check recursion. And we're going to try and possibly fail to do some stuff. We're going to iterate over the queue with this flush index variable, which we saw before. And we're going to get the job from the queue. And if the job is non-null and it's active, then we'll keep going. Otherwise, we're going to call with error handling and possibly return. We're going to call, essentially execute the job and possibly have some scheduler errors, I guess, if stuff fails. And then finally, we'll set the queue length to 0. We're 100% sure that this can't be, that the queue can't accumulate new things after this loop thinks it's done. I'm not really sure how like locking works in JavaScript, but I don't really see any locks or anything. But we can, at any rate, we'll call post flush callbacks on scene and say that we're not flushing and say that the current flush promise is essentially nothing. Okay, that's actually a little bit surprising. I am going to ask the AI overlords about the performance of Vue. Vue nodes we've kind of seen. I'm going to ignore I'm going to ignore. That's the thing that renders HTML. HMR, did we look this up? Look this up. That's the hot reload stuff. That's possibly interesting, but we're basically out of time. Reactivity, we look briefly. We have things like computed constants, depth, maybe dependencies, effect. Do they implement their own reactive stuff? I would have thought that they would use an existing library. Reactive.ts. It imports some stuff like mutable handlers. Reactive flag skip is reactive map, etc. I'm just going to do a quick scan to see if there's anything that really jumps out at me. There's this reactive proxy thing, which might be deep. I don't know if this means it's like deep copies. It affects all nested properties as opposed to maybe just looking at the top level properties. Function reactive. It looks like they did maybe implement their own reactive library. I don't know if I love that though. And then there's this effect stuff. This is a Facebook project. Who created Vue? Oh, okay. I think I have to go. But before I go, let me check these photos. Okay. These don't look anything like React developers. This is what Bard thinks they are. But let me ask about is the what can you say about the performance of Vue.js's scheduler versus the React scheduler? Is one known to be faster on average, let's say? It's not straightforward. There's yeah. These AIs give like really non-committal answers. But let's do Vue.js versus um, JS versus React versus Angular speed. Log rocket. React has the fastest speed, with Angular taking second place and Vue coming in at 1.7. That doesn't surprise me. Um, it seems like Angular is optimized for other things, um, such as like stability, um, correctness, because it has the compiling thing. Um, it also seems a bit large compared to React, and it seems like just reading Vue scheduler, I would expect it to be a little bit slow, but it doesn't seem like insanely slow. Let's see if we can find a graph, and then I really do have to go. And I'm just pulling up random images, so I have no reason to believe that anything I see is like a valid benchmark. But hey, what? Oh, I'm in Google image search. Try in DuckDuckGo where I can grab the image more easily. Can't I? Performance, moderate level, moderate level, moderate level. Really? That's all we got? That was not worth spending that much time opening that image. Popularity, Angular. Interest over time. What? Raw speed. This is like, all right, whatever. Well, I don't know. Maybe you know. Maybe I'm curious to know if there's appreciable performance differences because it seems like you read the React scheduler and it's like optimized to the hilt. It looks like the Vue scheduler is just chaining promises together, which is vastly simpler. So one would hope that all of the work that React has put in um, is intended to pay off in some way, and ideally does pay off in some way. But I'm not sure. So that's that's Vue.js. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone in the comment section and who's watching. I appreciate it very much. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.